Thank you. This is Roger Mader, and I'm delighted today to have John Rosling with me today from Contexis. He is a specialist in not just purposeful enterprise, but in effect, ensuring that it works, finding the ways to measure the impact of the actions that we each take in order to ensure that a purpose is being achieved. So, John, thanks very much for joining us today, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm John Rosling, as you said. Contexis, we are an organization that's become obsessed with understanding the humanity of organizations, understanding what makes great organizations, and understanding the role of purpose within that over several years now. And more recently, last 4 years, working with Cambridge University and other academics to actually be able to measure some of that stuff, to provide reliable, academically robust metrics and numbers that will allow companies to become purposeful and to track their purpose.
Let me ask you how you think of the role of purpose for organizations.
I think the framework that you have is really interesting because to me, they cover the whole conversation around purpose. I know you have a particular P on your Ps, which is purpose, but actually the articulation of purpose sits in your first P. And then the bringing to life, the living, the activation of purpose sits in your next four. So it actually, from our experience of looking at this, as I say, quite obsessively over the last several years, it does cover a lot of ground, and I'm impressed with it. And I like the simplicity I mean by purpose. To us, this is the fundamental why that sits behind the organization. Why do we exist? Why do we deserve to exist? It can be a statement, but in our experience, that doesn't get you very far. So if organizations think they're just going to come up with some clever words, maybe spend a bit of money with a good agency to come up with those words, it isn't going to get them very far unless they're prepared to actually live them. So you like P's, I like C's. I have four C's, or three that I'll talk about, that I think fundamentally make sense of this to me. So the first is that purpose has to be courageous. I do think in all of our experience of looking at organizations globally, they have to say something that matters to people. If it doesn't matter, if it's not important, then why bother? So it has to be courageous. And I think that means it transcends the interests of the company. I think it should inspire people, but I also think there should be some risk in it. There should be some jeopardy. You should be saying something brave. So I would say courageous. But having said that, it's got to be consistent. It's got to be consistent with what the company does. There's no point in having an aspirational, fluffy purpose that has nothing to do with what you do for a living. It has to be, and we can talk about examples where people get this right. It has to be consistent with the organization. And I also think it has to be coherent with what the company does for a living, if you like. So the difference in consistency and coherence. So coherence is relevant to what you do, and consistency is you keep doing it. So I would say it has to cross CEO tenures. There's no point in having, I'm going to bring in a new purpose. You can reinterpret, but it has to have that consistency. So courage, coherence, and consistency are the first of my four C's, three of those C's. So that's to me what purpose is like. And I can tell you how we measure it if you're interested.
The challenge that I have with the research I've done is that where you find organizations that really operate purposefully, it very often is born from the founder's story. It's the origin story of the company, which I think is what makes it so challenging for professional management who come in generation after generation in longstanding legacy organizations to establish purpose where there had not been one before, or where it was lost and had been superseded by a pursuit of profit, for example, that has been sort of the focus of so many boards and organizations in the last 40, 50 years.
The mystery is why all of the large organizations that you and I have worked for over the years seem to have forgotten that people are relatively simple. And actually, what most of us want is a profound sense of meaning, that what we do every day matters and that our lives have some meaning. So personal meaning, and that directly connects with organizational meaning if we as employers allow it to. And the second is that we want to connect and feel part of a collective. So if we can feel part of a collective organization that does something meaningful, that allows us to feel pride in what they do, then I don't need to go and seek work elsewhere. So going right back to Dan Pink's work about purpose and mastery and autonomy, here's a whole thing about why do people go and learn instruments or do stuff outside work? That's because we at work don't provide them with that connection to meaning. So I think personal meaning, people are meaning driven and they're collaborative. simple. So all we need to do as employers, as organizations, is to provide that. But then you have this whole conversation about, so what is the purpose of my company? And I think we can be at risk of mystifying this and making it sound very complicated. A way of understanding a coherent and congruent purpose is to go back to the creation story. But that is only one way of doing it. As long as the company comes up with something that is relevant to what it does, my congruent word, and sticks to it in a way that is coherent and consistent, then I think that really does allow you to create a meaning that people can subscribe to.
You did a lovely job, or Contexis did a nice job of creating a diagram that showed the correlation between purpose and performance. And I believe that's a really good illustration of the fact that the value of purpose is kind of demonstrated through the performance of companies. What you also offered was what I think of as a spider diagram, a multi-vector diagram of the correlation of high purpose versus low purpose, and sort of mapping the implications of that. Can you talk me through the various, what are the variables on that diagram and why?
So, yeah, well, I think what you're referring to is where we have like a radar or spider diagram.
Yeah, that's right.
If you just plot human organizational, let's call it human behavior. Right. You know, am I engaged? Am I aligned? Am I open? Am I learning? Do I feel I'm in a culture of compassion? Am I decisive? Am I adaptive? You can kind of map those, and then all you need to do is measure those. And if we compare a diagram, which is essentially a circle with those arranged on the outside, and the bigger the splodge in the middle, the more you get, the better the company is. What's really interesting is that those companies, those organizations, or parts of organizations, whichever way you look at it, which have higher degrees of what I would call activated purpose, the bigger the splodge is, so that the bigger the ground it covers. So you can compare two companies, and the more purposeful one has much higher levels of behavior. Or within a company, you can compare high purpose and low purpose people, and the differences are quite stark. So your last of your 5 things, by the way, Roger, being performance. You know, we can talk for the rest of the afternoon about performance. What I can say is it's pretty damn clear that purpose drives organizational performance, and that does ultimately pan out into commercial performance. That does come out into dollars. Ultimately, that is not the reason you do it, but it does have that impact.
Is there a website or a link that I can share that would direct people to discover more about it?
Yes, so it's contextisindex.com.
Okay.
And I'm sure you can provide a link. But you know, there's a lot of information there that would be useful. But one thing I would say is this is a live research project. This is university research, and we are really keen to involve and engage as many companies as want to be involved and engaged. And so we work with some of the biggest organizations in the world, and we work with some small ones.
Can't tell you how much I appreciate having a tool born of research that would allow us to make sure that we're doing it well.
Thank you very much, Roger. And I do rather agree with everything you've just said, but that's for another conversation.
And we will have another. I very much appreciate it, John. And thanks for the work that you do.
Lovely to talk to you. Thank you, Roger.
Take
Bye.
care.